Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the first chapter in the book of Zepheniah. And the challenge when reading Zepheniah is at face value in isolation from the wider web of scriptural theology. It is a message of despair, yet it can be a message of hope when we look at it in the lens of the wider scriptural theology. The negative presentations of negative messages, the central theme of this book is the day of Yahweh, which is a day of judgment, and alternately a day of salvation. It's really a dichotomous divide between blessings and cursings. It is the ultimate manifestation of the ultimate blessing and the ultimate cursing. The ultimate cursing is the judgment, and the ultimate blessing is being alleviated or spared from the judgment. That is salvation or being saved. And with that in mind, we can look at the gruesome aspects of this message with hope in mind, and that inasmuch as we abide and obey, we will be spared of the otherwise unavoidable and inevitable spectacles of which we read. And the opening verse reads, "The word of Yahweh which came to Zephaniah, son of Cushi, son of Gedaliah, son of Amariah, son of Hezekiah, in the days of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah." Now, the name Hezekiah, we have to categorically consider the possibility that Zephaniah was of royal blood, being descended from the great reformer, King Hezekiah, whose son and heir was Manasseh, who set the standard for wickedness amongst Judean monarchs. He reigned for 55 years. Yet he apparently may have had another son named Amariah, and that is through whom Zephaniah was descended. And Isaiah himself was of royal blood. So we have to consider the possibility that he was preaching from royal blood, and he would have had access to the king's heir. Now, Josiah himself was another great reformer, as per the tradition of Hezekiah, and he reigned from 640 to 609 BM before Messiah, and in the year 622, the writing of the law was rediscovered in the temple, and that led to a great revival. And Zephaniah was contemporaries with Jeremiah, whose message seemed to center amongst the imminent and inevitable Babylonian judgment at their hands, but Zephaniah seemingly looks to a greater judgment to come, that being the day of Yahweh, which is the ultimate judgment. "I shall snatch away all from the face of the earth, declares Yahweh. I snatch away man and beast. I snatch away the birds of the heavens, and the fish of the sea, and the stumbling blocks with the wicked, when I shall cut off man from the face of the earth, declares Yahweh." So we get the scope of this intervention, divine intervention, and imminent judgment is nothing like it since the days of Noah, when Yahweh wiped out the entire, every living animal creature, save those who were spared along Noah in the ark. So this is an irrevocable destruction of all things living on the earth, and the old must make way for the new. So at face value, it is a message of death, but it is also alternatively a message of life. "And I shall stretch out my hand against Judah, and against all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and cut off every trace of Baal from this place, the names of the idolatrous priest, with the priesthood." And Baal was fertility and power deity of the Canaanites, who were the aboriginal inhabitants of the Promised Land, and the worship of him was a nuisance throughout Israel's history. They succumbed. He was a rival for the affection of Yahweh among his chosen people throughout various locations in their history, and people tended to look to him as for fertility and power, yet they looked away from the one who is omnipotent, all-powerful, that being Yahweh. And the priests who serve him or lead the people astray, for them is the greatest judgment reserved. They're identified as stumbling blocks for the wicked, because idolatry is the sin which leads to every other sin, and it is with good reason that the frequency of warnings and injunctions against it exceed that of any other sin throughout the Old Testament. And those bowing down to the host of the heavens and on the housetops, and those bowing themselves, swearing by Yahweh and swearing by Molech. Now, Molech was the chief deity of the Ammonites, who were descended from Lot's, Abraham's nephew, then known as Abram. Lot, the incestuous liaison between him and his daughters, was the progeny of which would become a rival nation to Israel, and their chief deity was Molech. And the practice of syncretism, which is combining worship of Yahweh and the true faith with the admixtures of foreign forbidden elements, was endemic throughout Israel's history. But if one claims to worship Yahweh and shares him with anyone else, then they haven't truly worshipped him, because with right reason he does demand exclusive love and loyalty. And that is one of the commandments. And those who turn away from following Yahweh, and who have not sought Yahweh or inquired of him. So even though Yahweh features in their worship practices, he is not utilized effectively, because they nullified his great power by sharing him their affection with any other deity. Hushi, in the presence of the master, hush, in the presence of the master Yahweh, for the day of Yahweh is near, for Yahweh has prepared a slaughter, he has sanctified his invited ones. So the day of Yahweh is the ultimate judgment, whereby the entire world is subjected to judgment, in which the sheep will be scattered from the goats, and etc., etc. And this demands silence, so he opens the verse by saying hush, and that is the natural response of being in the divine presence. We are awestruck into silence, and with the knowledge that the day of Yahweh is near, that means it may not come tomorrow, but it will come eventually. And he has prepared a slaughter or sacrifice, and he has sanctified his invited ones. So there's that dichotomy between saved and unsaved, and judged and condemned. And we who abide in the vine, John 15, will be spared the judgment. And it shall be in the day of the slaughter of Yahweh, that I shall punish the rulers and the sons of the king, and all as such as are clad in foreign garments. Foreign garments were indicative of idolatrous practices, whereby they skewed the native Israelite garb for that of the foreign priest, who they had infiltrated their religious ceremonies and spiritual worship. And the more prominent the position, the higher the responsibility, and the greater the judgment. So far from authority and status being a protective barrier in the judgment of Yahweh, and in fact invites potentially greater consequences. And I shall punish on that day all who leap over the threshold, who fill their masters' houses with violence and deceit. So just because the authority and status figures are being judged doesn't mean that their servants and underlings don't carry responsibility and consequences for the manner in which they perform in those capacities. They are entrusted to and guard their master's house, and they filled it with violence and deceit, and that is unbecoming of a faithful servant. And on that day there shall be, declares Yahweh, the sound of a cry from the fish gate, and a howling from the second quarter, and of a great crashing from the hills. So this is a dramatic event, well known throughout the area. It's unavoidable. You cannot escape hearing of it, or even hearing it, because it will be that dramatic and that awesome. Howl, you inhabitants of Maktesh, for all the merchant people shall be silenced, and all those weighing out silver shall be cut off. So howling is a sound one makes in pain or agony, and the merchant people, those who make a living off of trade, are apt to trust in money and as a substitute deity. They invest their trust and affection in riches, which are temporal and are of no lasting significance beyond the grave. And so they're in for a rude awakening on the day of Yahweh. And at that time it shall be that I search Jerusalem with lamps and punish the men who are settled on their dregs, who say in their heart, Yahweh does no good, nor does he evil. So they have effectively silenced Yahweh in their minds as a passive deity who does not save and does not judge and does not exercise good and evil. Isaiah 45:7, he is the creator of dark and light, good and evil. So everything in existence has its origin in him. So he is very much involved and invested in the fate of the humanity. And their wealth shall become plunder, and their houses laid waste, and they shall build houses, but not inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards, but not drink their wine. So wealth it doesn't truly belong to anyone, because anyone can take it at any given moment, and it can become plunder. But really, we and building houses and planting vineyards, but not being able to enjoy its protection or the fruits of your labor is what those have to look forward to. Near is the great day of Yahweh, near and hurrying greatly, the noise of the day of Yahweh. Let the mighty man then bitterly cry out. So this is a natural response to the imminent approach of the foreordained day of judgment, is the mighty man will be reduced to cries of agony and bitterly crying out. That day is a day of wrath, a day of distress and trouble, a day of waste and ruin, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds, dense clouds, a day of ram's horns and alarm against the walled city and against the corner towers. So this is nothing to look forward to if you're on the receiving end of the punishment and judgment, which is one of the functions of the day of Yahweh, is to separate the damned from the saved, and there's really nothing to look forward to, and the ominous portents are alluded to and referenced in the sky, and the gloominess is indicative of that which they have to look forward to. And I shall bring distress on men, and they shall walk like blind men, because they have sinned against Yahweh, and their blood shall be poured out like dust, and their flesh like dung. So this is again a reiteration that there's really nothing to look forward to. Just imagine being blinded. We rely on our eyes to get to point A to B, and just the loss of them is inconceivable to we who take them for granted. Yet at that day of judgment, those who are spiritually blind will be physically blind, and rightly so. And their blood shall be poured out like dust, and their flesh like dung. That just means that every physical instrument that we have attached to our body is perishable, as is wealth. So when we invest our faith in affection in that which is perishable, we will perish alongside with it. But if we invest it in him who is unperishable, we shall not perish. And we have the promise in the New Testament that those who belong to him shall in no wise perish. Neither their silver nor their gold shall be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of Yahweh. And by the fire of his jealousy all the earth shall be consumed. For he makes a sudden end of all those who dwell in the earth. So this is an all-encompassing judgment and an inescapable doom for those who walk in their waywardness or trust in silver or in any way deviate or apostatize from the straight and narrow. So we are implicitly admonished to remain on the straight and narrow. That way we can look at the gloomy and the foreboding with hope in mind, and that is not a natural process, but it is a supernatural process, and it is possible through prayer. And that concludes today's lesson. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.